It is April 10th, and it is time to share with you the projects that I was knitting on in the month of March. I thought it would be proper to include a little bit of a welcome segment in this video. In previous recaps of my monthly knitting, I just kind of jumped right into the knitting, and I do want to keep that very focused mindset, but at the same time I wanted to say welcome to this video, to all videos on this channel. And I am Hannah. I am a knitter. I also am a tech editor of knitting patterns, and I enjoy working with my hands. I do that in a lot of different ways, but I especially enjoy working with my hands when it comes to using needles and yarn to knit. And I hope that the videos I put up here will help you or encourage, inspire you to keep knitting, learn to knit, as I share with you what I'm learning, what I'm making, what mistakes I've made, what things went well, and materials I'm enjoying working with, all that stuff. So hopefully to encourage and help you in your journey and projects that you knit. So like last time, just a short disclaimer that some of these projects will have some knitting I did in April because we are 10 days into April. But other than that, we should be good to get started. So normally on this podcast video style recap monthly of my knitting, I have been following kind of a routine of sharing my finished projects with you and then moving to the projects that I'm still working on. Today I'm going to add a little bit of a segment at the end where I'm going to share with you some plans that I hope to have up for projects that I hope to cast on very soon. I don't normally do this. For me, I find plans change, and I don't like to get too deep into the details of my plans and share them with people, especially when they are very likely to change. But these plans of projects I hope to cast on very soon. I'm very clear, I think, about the plan, at least the projects, and they're all related to sock knitting. So if you are interested in sock knitting, the projects, patterns, different yarns I'm looking at, and why I'm looking into these projects and patterns and what I like about them, I'm going to share about that at the end for anybody interested in hearing my thoughts as I move forward in planning these projects. I have one project that I finished in the month of March, and it was my dad's fingerless gloves, which are right here. If you've watched previous recaps, you know I've talked a lot about these fingerless gloves. I've talked a lot about my mom's fingerless gloves that were inspired these. These are like the second one, the improvement pair, from what I learned on her pair of fingerless gloves. So I won't go too much detail because I've already talked a lot, but for those who have not heard about these gloves yet, I use Knit Picks Pallete for the yarn. I had it in my stash and I enjoyed using it very much for this project. It's super soft, yet it's quite durable feeling. It was very inexpensive and it bloomed beautifully with the color work. After blocking, it just filled in so nicely, so I'm really glad I used it. And I used Autumn Heather was the color for the red. The white is just white. And I used a needle size US 1 2.25 millimeter for the ribbing, and that's not just the ribbing on the cuff down here, it's also the ribbing up here and at the top of the thumbs. I did US 1 was the needle size for those, and then the hand was US 2 2.275 millimeter needles. The construction wise, it's just 1x1 ribbing, and then the check ferrule color work, you have your thumb gusset, and then just more 1x1 ribbing up here, and then just a little bit of 1x ribbing at the tops of the thumbs. And I used a tubular cast on and a tubular bind off, which I've been so enjoying. I enjoy not only the finished edge of the tubular cast on and bind off, it's super stretchy, but it also is just super neat. And I also enjoy working the tubular cast, mainly the tubular bind off. I am, as I'm going to share, not mastered the tubular cast on just yet, but the tubular bind off is very rhythmic once you get into it, and I found it much easier to get stuck up in my head than, say, the Kitchener stitch took a little bit longer. So pretty much can get into tubular bind off and not have to be reading the instructions anymore, and that's very nice, and I find it very relaxing to work. So I really enjoy using the tubular bind off. What happened with the tubular cast on? So I'm going to show you first because it did not happen on both pairs. I messed up on one of the pairs. We'll see if the camera will pick it up. I don't know if you can see, but it's really just neat 1x1 ribbing. And then up here, it just kind of gets a little bit twisted. And that is because I had to do a little bit of picking up and finagling to fix my mistake. So let me share with you my mistake. I was doing the method for the tubular cast on that is instructed in the knitter's let me look this up before I say it wrong. So it was the Knitter's Book of Knowledge by Debbie Bliss. And what I did wrong was when you do her method, I'm going to hold this up so I can demonstrate. You cast on stitches in some waste yarn first, and then you work a few rows in the given instructions. Then you switch to your main color that you're going to use for the actual project. So for me, that was this Autumn Heather colorway. And then you pick up stitches that were from that first row of stitches that you worked in this color. So you cast on in waste yarn. I think you work a row, or maybe not. I'm going to check on that and I'll put it in the show notes. But then you work a few rows in the color you're going to use for your project, and then you're going to pick up from that first row that was your actual yarn project yarn row or round. And I picked up from the waste yarn instead of the yarn, the Autumn Heather color here. So when I went to go undo my stitches and take out the waste yarn, I had live stitches that were coming undone. So to compensate and why the stitches are kind of twisted and stuff, I ended up ripping back and picking up stitches and just working up in 1x1 ribbing and then casting off in a tubular bind off to create the same tubular bind off edge. But it definitely wasn't neat, and it was definitely a little bit of finagling that had to happen to pick up all the stitches and make sure they weren't twisted. It wasn't very neat, and you can tell, but thankfully the Autumn Heather color in this yarn kind of blends it really well, and it's not too noticeable. I notice it bothers me, but it's a learning experience, and I should have mastered the tubular cast on now for next time. I think I will definitely use her method, as it was just so clear in the book. I could follow the pictures and read it really well, and just this time I know to not pick up from the waste yarn. I know to pick up from that first row around of your actual project yarn. And hopefully next time I won't have live stitches coming undone. I will try to explain what happened a little bit clearer in the show notes. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm going to link the show notes. I've been doing this in the, not comments, but the area below where the information for this video is. I send a link in the information to my blog, which is where I post the show notes. So that includes all the yarn, the patterns for each project, the needle sizes I used, and for this project I will try to explain in words a little bit clearer what happened in my mistakes so you can learn from it. I'm a little bit better, I feel like, with writing than I am with words, so hopefully I can share with you a little bit better in the written section of the show notes. So that will be below. So that is the one finished project from the month of March. We're now on to the projects that I was knitting on in March but did not complete in the month of March. The first one is the Buttonside Sweater by Jennifer Dossier, which I am knitting. I am knitting this for myself, and I am knitting size 32¼ inch bust from the pattern. And I chose Wool of the Andes worsted. It's their Wool of the Andes worsted weight in the color Evergreen. And I am knitting it on US 2.75 millimeter needles. And this is actually from my Chaogu interchangeable needle set. I did purchase their interchangeable needle set a couple years ago, probably my best knitting needle tool purchase that I have made. I use it all the time. They're so good quality, you can barely, like, they look brand new, and they are nice and sharp tips, so they don't like split the yarn when I'm knitting, but they're also not too sharp. Like, this isn't uncomfortable to be tapping my finger on the tip. Definitely one of probably my most expensive tool purchases, but definitely a worthwhile one. And I will use it probably for as long as I can knit, and hopefully someone else will continue to knit with it after me. I have my great grandmother's knitting needle set, which, comment if you would like to see that sometime. I have all my, at least all that she gave to me, needle set, and it is quite a treasure to have, even though I don't knit from it very often. There are a lot of straight needles, and I usually work with circular or DPNs, and a number of them are plastic, which I don't know if any of you have ever knit with plastic needles, but I have found it to be quite the challenge. My needles, when I knit with plastic needles, and specifically her plastic needles, it's like the yarn just, it sticks, and it just doesn't slide well, and it basically just, I don't enjoy working with it at all, but I enjoy looking at them, and it's definitely reminds me that these needles are a worthy purchase. They will go on to be used for a long time. So this I knit a lot on in March. Was just starting the front, I believe, last time I was sharing, and now the front is done. The back is done, the front is done, and I have picked up just now for the sleeve. And I haven't started to knit on it yet, but that's where I left off, was I picked up for the sleeve. What do I want to share? Part of the reason I was able to get a good amount of knitting done on this sweater was my dad and I did a quick trip down to Florida, and it involved a lot of driving. So when I wasn't driving, I was knitting, and I was knitting just on this. Isn't that cute? This is the back to school sock set pattern. That's the pattern of this sock by Hannah Graham, or Hannah G Knits, and I knit it with Quince & Co. Finch in the color clay, and the ruffle is used Solitude wool, which is a Virginia wool company, which is so neat. I love finding local yarn when I can, and this is their Llama Rama, so it's a very light fingering, and it was just perfect for this little ruffle, and it's got little hairs kind of coming out. I casted on this project at the end of March, and this has been what I've been knitting on probably the most the last week. The second one is in way, and so very soon some little feet are going to get a new pair of socks. When I went to go look for a sock pattern, so the story of this project is my mom had requested me to knit a pair of socks for my youngest sister. She's a little older than one, and I wanted to use someone else's pattern. I wanted to try something new, but when I go look for patterns, one of the keys I try to look for when I'm purchasing a pattern is I'm also looking at what yarns I have and what I have on hand and what will match gauge wise, color, what works with what I have. But also I want a pattern that I would knit again and again. Occasionally I might buy a pattern that's unique. I once bought a colorwork hat that was like a horse hat. I don't know if I would knit it many times, but had something specific in mind for someone. But I really, with this sock pattern, for little feet that I would want to be knitting again and again, I wanted to find a pattern that I would enjoy knitting, the process again and again, but also just the sock pattern and the design of it was just so practical. And I saw Hannah's back to school sock set, and it was exactly what I was looking for. It was just such a practical design. You have this just knitted cuff that's folded over, and you pick up the stitches to create this really nice and sturdy cuff. It's nice and warm too, just because it's like that double layered cuff. and then it goes into a knit 3 purl 1 rib, which I love on socks because I feel like it just hugs a leg so nicely, and that runs all the way down the top of the foot, and then it's just a basic heel, and it's an afterthought heel, which was exciting. Another reason I was excited about her pattern, because I had never worked an afterthought heel before. I had seen them for years and I had never actually worked one, so I'm always on the lookout for a pattern that's going to challenge me at least in one new skill, and then I can learn as I'm knitting. So that was my first afterthought heel. It went very well, except I think I picked up the number of stitches for the size up, so I picked up like 2 extra stitches, so it's got a little extra heel room. I wasn't paying attention when I did it, but I don't notice it, and I'm very happy with these socks. I'm super happy with the pattern. I would highly recommend Hannah's back to school sock set. You can knit it without the ruffle. Another reason I was attracted to it, it just had different variations. You can do obviously contrasting heels and toes. I enjoyed this pattern. I enjoyed working it. It's super fast, especially when you're doing an afterthought heel, because you just keep on going. You don't really stop to do the heel, you do that later. So the back to school sock set by Hannah G Knits, super happy with that purchase. I am already planning my next baby socks that I'm going to be casting on, toddler socks. Very happy with that knit. For those of you who noticed I forgot, I knit the socks on US 1 2.25 millimeter needles, and that was what was suggested in the pattern. But what I did was I did get a little bit larger gauge, so I knit my swatch, I blocked it with US 1, and which is recommended in the pattern, and my swatch was a little bigger than 4 inches. So what I did was I dropped a needle, I dropped a size in the pattern. So I used the US 1 as recommended, but I went down. So I think instead of doing the size 18 months, which is what I intended to do for my sister, I went down to 12 months, and I tried them on and they fit perfectly. They hug really nice, and that's what I want, because from my past experience with hand knit wool socks, they get stretched out really quickly when they get worn a lot. So I am very happy I did that. So wanted to share the needle size and that little modification before I move on. That is all the projects that I was knitting on in March. I still have the 2 color tapestry cowl that is published by the Woolly Thistle. I still have that cast on, still in a project bag, still getting worked on, but not in March. So I am looking forward to finishing that project in the future, but with all the spring weather and just as I evaluated projects, I decided that that project could hold, and the requested socks and the sweater that I was working on were what I was going to focus on in March. So, but it deserved a mention. It's still alive. It's just hibernating in a project bag until a later date. Now I get to share with you some plans I have. So I wanted to do this little segment because I know some people do it, and I hope it can be inspiring and share with you what you might expect in upcoming episodes. And I guess it can be summed up in one word: socks. So usually I knit socks in the winter, but for some reason this spring I have just been itching to cast on socks. I think partly because they're such a nice gift, and people wear them. They're really comfortable, at least for the people I know and in my family. People really like their socks, and I want to knit things people are going to wear and use. That's why I knit. I prefer knitting things that get worn and used, and I'm not much of a toy knitter at all. You might never see a toy on here. We'll see. I prefer things that are going to be put on people's bodies and kept warm or cool or whatever. So I am planning on knitting a lot of the back to school sock set socks in the next upcoming months. Not only for my younger sister, but I just know a number of little feet that, oops, I'm giving things away, that would appreciate maybe a pair of socks. I need to dedicate some time to some little socks. And I have this yarn in my yarn cupboard that I really want to use. Not only want to use because I dyed this last year with marigolds. If you are over on Instagram, you may have seen I shared a lot about the process of dyeing. With marigolds, I go through the mordanting. I use alum to mordant these, which holds the dye to the yarn. We grew the marigolds in our garden. This was just such a fun project to do over 2022, and I haven't yet got to actually knit much with it. I can't even remember if I've swatched or anything. So I pulled up 2 of the skeins, and I pulled up 2 because I wanted to show you that how much variation you can sometimes get in natural dyeing. I appreciate it. I think it's very neat. It just shows you it's not right off a factory line. It's different. And so I really am excited to hopefully cast on next. If I'm not going to knit one more pair of pink back to school socks from Hannah G Knits, I'm going to use this bright marigold pink color, and I may use the brown, that Llama Rama again, or I may go white. Let me pull it out. I'm not sure if I'll go brown and yellow with a brown ruffle and a yellow sock, but that is my first plan. So like I said, I really enjoyed Hannah's back to school sock set pattern, and this is some of the yarn that I'm considering for the next pairs, because I plan to hopefully knit up a few of those in the next month's time period. The other thing I want to use up is if you remember back in January, I had knit a pair of socks that I didn't want to pronounce because I think it was in French, and I didn't want to mess it up. So again, I'll put the name on the screen, and I'll mention it in the show notes, the socks, and where you can find the information on that project. But I knit a pair of socks by Marie Amelie Designs. It was a free pattern on Ravelry, and it was just a beautiful cabled sock pattern. I'll see if I can put pictures in of it right now. I still have leftover yarn from that project. This is Malabrigo. Let me make sure I'm right on this. Yes, it is Malabrigo sock in the color Wales Road. And this is a superwash yarn, which means I really like to gift yarn socks that are made with this yarn. I don't mind hand washing the socks, but I like to gift it to people. Gift people socks that are knit with superwash, just because I don't want to assume everyone's comfortable with hand washing or put that burden on them, like if they hand wash the socks they're gonna felt. So I got this Malabrigo sock yarn from a yarn shop in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I knit a pair of socks from them and I gifted them, but I have this much left. So though I'm not set on the pattern yet, I hope to use up this sock yarn, and then I had bought more of that Malabrigo sock in a different color, which I will put the name up on the screen in the show notes because I do not have it. I forgot to write it down. But this one is really pretty. Both of them are really pretty, and these are both superwash. So these are going to hopefully become a pair of socks, but as for the pattern, I haven't completely decided yet. So there is a pair of socks, a sock pattern on Ravelry called Wish You Were Home by the Kitchen Sink Designs. Nope, the Kitchen Sink Shop. The Kitchen Sink Shop, Wish You Were Here. And it is a free pattern that was on Ravelry. I don't always use free patterns, but I had actually printed this out months ago to maybe try as one of the options with these yarns, and I had never tried it. So I'm looking at that pattern, but I also saw the Kitchen Sink Shop had some other really fun sock patterns that would be great gift socks. So I might check out her shop and go see what else she has. So these, plan-wise, these I hope to turn into socks before the summer, or at least within the next, during the summer months. But I'm not completely set on patterns yet. So trying to use up yarn that I have, and trying to knit lots of socks because they're fun to knit right now, and they're also just really practical right now to be working on. They're going to get used. If you stayed to this point, thank you so much for coming and sitting with me and watching through my documentation of my knitting in the month of March. I hope you walk away from this and you have some new ideas, or you learned something new about some new materials, my mistakes, something that's going to help and encourage you in happy knitting. And I hope to see you in a month's time. Bye.